So next off, we're going to check our igniter. First thing we're going to do is loosen the screws and let the igniter pivot back. And now we're going to take the fuel line off. And then we'll take the retaining nut off, which will allow the electrode to come up out of the burner box so it can be inspected. To get the electrode out, once the retaining nut is off, just slide it in to the interior of the burner and then just carefully pull it up out. So one of the main things you want to check is make sure that there's no residue on the ends of the electrode where the igniter touches, and then also inspect the ceramic covering around the electrodes. If there's any cracks, you'll want to replace those electrodes, as the cracks will let it bleed off the electricity. Then we're going to want to make sure that the electrodes are set properly, and you can see in the manual the exact measurement. There's also a gauge for checking those. You'll want to make sure if it needs adjustment, you can loosen the screw on the top and move the electrodes back and forth to set it, and then also pivot it to make sure it's set in the proper distance from the nozzle. The nozzle on the front should also be inspected. That just screws out of the brass housing. There is a small filter on the back of the nozzle that should be checked to make sure there's no residue blocking the flow of the fuel. These nozzles should be checked at least once every 500 hours or once a year. They can also, you can replace those. There is a number printed right on the nozzle. You'll want to make sure you have the proper nozzle for the size of machine you have. Okay, now that we're all set, this is all ready to go back in. You just carefully put the igniter back into the electrode back into the housing. It will slide down into the nose there, and then the fuel fitting will come through the side of the burner housing. And then you'll want to put the retaining nut on. Once you have the retaining nut on, before you put the fuel filter on, you're going to want to take the gauge and check the air tube on the front of the burner, making sure that it is in proper adjustment. The gauge should fit right up against the nozzle, and then the vanes of the burner tube should come up to the sides of the gauge. If it does need to be adjusted, there's a screw right beside the retaining nut that can be loosened, and the whole igniter can be moved back and forth to set it properly. So once you get the retaining nut on, go ahead and reinstall your fuel line, making sure it's snug, but do not over tighten it. When you're ready to fire the burner the first time, you'll want to check and make sure you have a good seal and you're not leaking any diesel fuel from that. Once that's completed, the next item is to check the springs on the bottom of the igniter. That's what makes contact with your electrodes. So make sure that they're not compressed and they make good contact with the electrodes. When you close the lid, it should be sprung up just a little, and you'll have to push it down to set the retaining tabs. Tighten those back up, and you should be ready to fire your burner up.